Welcome to the Paranormal Bedtime Stories podcast. I'm author Todd Chapman, your host. Join me as we explore the mysterious world of the supernatural. From encounters with aliens to sightings of Bigfoot, we delve into it all. I've experienced the paranormal since childhood and even had a near-death experience that led me to become a contact tour guide in Sedona, Arizona. Now, I bring you first-hand accounts from those tours and from individuals who I've interviewed. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to never miss an episode. You can find my books in paperback and for Kindle at Amazon.com or by using the link in my bio. Now, on to our story. This episode explores real stories from real combat veterans and how their battlefield experiences continue to haunt them so many years later. Is it possible the ghosts of people they killed are haunting them or keeping them awake at night? Might that explain certain hauntings, such as a home where the deceased grew up, or possibly the presence of shadow people? And what if children and others in the house are seeing the same shadow people or ghosts that the person suffering from PTSD is being haunted by? My mom dated a man who, following his tour in Vietnam, suffered from PTSD and nightly flashbacks or nightmares. She said the only time he spoke to her about his nightmares was after he awoke beside her screaming violently and covered in sweat. I finally asked him about it, she said. He told me that when he and a buddy were on patrol in a tiny village, a young girl approached them from up ahead. They were always on alert, but never suspected anything bad from a child. The two men stopped to talk to her. She must have been 5 or 6 years old. She wanted to sell them a candy bar for American money. Henry's buddy slung his rifle over his shoulder and reached for his wallet from his back pocket. He said their pockets had buttons on them, so he was struggling to get the wallet out when the girl took advantage of the situation and pulled out a pistol and shot him. She then looked at Henry right in the eyes and, without blinking, moved the gun toward him. He had a decision to make and fast. My life or hers, he said. He didn't want to do it, but she kept aiming toward him. He pulled his trigger and killed her. His buddy lay lifeless on the ground beside him, and so did a little girl. On top of this, he blamed himself for his buddy's death. He said he wasn't paying good enough attention and should have seen her reach for her gun. When his buddy slung his rifle out of the way to reach for his wallet, he did so knowing Henry had his back. They were buddies in the field. He then looked away from the girl, fully trusting Henry to protect him. But that didn't happen. Henry said he would have been able to stop her, but he effed up and his friend lost his life as a result. Depression hit him like a ton of bricks. He regretted being born. He didn't understand why he was there in the first place, why so many of his friends were killed or were rendered useless from the crazy addictive drugs they were given. Why did he survive when so many had to die, including his friend? Being a nurse, my mother naturally wanted to help him. But how? I suspect that by getting him to talk about it, she hoped he might somehow feel better. No longer having it eat away at him from the inside. Unfortunately, after he confided in her, he broke off their multi-year relationship. It's possible that in that moment when he opened up to her, fear set in. Fear that he would lose her, someone else he cared about. Sometimes people who were hurt deeply don't allow others to get too close. If my mother didn't know how to help him, it wasn't going to happen. They were finished. His burden quickly fell on her shoulders as she felt guilty for asking him to share his nightmare with her. She didn't understand what he was going through and blamed herself for the breakup. As a result, she became depressed and needed to be medicated. Soon after, she turned to addictions and failed relationships. In a similar story, a Vietnam veteran told me he and his buddy were standing about 6 feet apart on the edge of a ridge. They were talking when a man behind them yelled out, "I'm hit. I'm hit. Get a medic." An enemy sniper took a long shot at one of us, he told me, but he missed and hit the guy behind us. Thinking how fortunate we were, we soon found ourselves in an even more difficult situation. He explained, while on patrol, a woman walked up to us. Like children, it's hard to keep your guard up when a woman approaches. We don't naturally consider women and children enemy combatants. She asked us questions, then produced an explosive. Acting faster than I could process what was happening, my buddy hit her in the face with the butt of his rifle and knocked her out. Luckily, she never pulled the pin on the damn thing. If she had, I wouldn't be here talking to you. We both suffer from severe PTSD now. Being in a foreign land among people that think differently is tough, but surviving the war and having to live out the rest of our lives knowing what we saw or had to do. You might say the war rages on, but it's now in our hearts and minds. That's when he pulled the collar of his shirt down to reveal a bullet hole scar just above his heart. He lived. Many others did not. I also heard about a Navy SEAL who, stricken with guilt, depression, and PTSD, took his own life. His best friend and the father of the woman that told me about him once told her he did some terrible things and could no longer live with himself. Then there's the only combat-related story one particular man offered to share with me. He said he was a Marine and flew on helicopters. He wouldn't tell me exactly where, but they were someplace the United States wasn't supposed to be. He wasn't alone in the helicopter. Another agency had men on board with him. Their mission was to fly into villages and grab men and women to ask them a few questions. The pilot flew up to 200 or so feet and waited for the interrogations to begin. When the suits were finished or didn't get the information they wanted, they kicked the people out to plummet to their death. The others to be questioned saw their fate if they lied or refused to comply. In the end, it didn't matter. They were all thrown out. This man said he heard their pleas and then their screams. He was afraid to say anything for fear they'd throw him out too, and then file a report saying he died during a routine training accident or something. It's no wonder that when he returned home, any argument with his wife escalated into death threats against her and their kids. She filed for divorce and moved away to protect the children. When he told me this story, it was many years later and after he changed. Carrying all that on my shoulders was baggage I didn't need, he told me. It took a while for the darkness of war to fade and for me to get back to a better life. My family was already gone. That was unfortunate, but it allowed for soul-searching and healing on my part. It took a long time, but it worked. I asked him how he was able to move on when so many people struggle with PTSD from combat. You're right, and I finally gave up the fight, so to speak. I surrendered my all to Jesus. Asking for forgiveness was the only thing I could do. But deep down, I still feel for those poor people. To be honest, I still feel some PTSD and guilt for my actions. I can't change that, but maybe now they'll let me into heaven. As a Christian, I believe that God works in mysterious ways. Therefore, whatever the reason was for my being there to witness those atrocities, I have to trust in Him and His plan for me. A friend and I were invited to attend a week-long training course in Canada. It was conducted by a government agent. When we arrived, I saw a couple of familiar faces. After catching up and introducing my friend, it was time for the training to begin. Our instructor had been involved in the TWA 800 flight crash in the mid-1990s. He had a lot to tell us about his experience, which directly relates to this chapter's focus on PTSD and trauma. Imagine for a moment what it must have been like to be a diver. They had to dive in the cold and dark Atlantic waters off the coast. Their only duty was to locate human body parts and bring them to the surface so other specialists could organize, identify, and tag them. There was another group of divers that looked for the 747's wreckage. The government man told us about the experience. Divers surfaced with bits and pieces, oftentimes an unknown body part. The trouble began when divers saw fish and turtles eating people. Such a sight really effed with their heads. Some of the divers couldn't take it and no longer functioned as needed. It was our instructor's job, and others like him, to help divers process their trauma and in such a way that allowed them to continue doing what they'd been trained to do. A young guy I used to work with wanted to join the Army after September 11th happened. I asked him why he was so excited to join up. "I want to shoot people and blow shit up with grenades." He was serious. He also played first-person shooter video games, so I really doubt he knew what to expect from real wartime conditions. When I compare him to the people mentioned earlier, who now suffer from a lifetime of PTSD, I wonder if portions of their trauma was caused by their unwillingness to kill someone. While people who already want to kill don't seem to suffer from PTSD like the first group. Can you imagine being a tunnel rat in Vietnam? Small in stature or short men were sent into the dark caves and tunnels looking for the enemy, equipped only with a flashlight and a gun. How do you deal with that kind of fear? It would be safer and much easier to just toss a couple of live grenades into the opening and allow the blast to cause a cave-in. If the enemy was hiding in the tunnel, that's where they would die. Unfortunately, if innocent women and children were in the cave hiding from our soldiers, they would be killed with no regard, and that just wouldn't be right. Now it's time to talk about the shadow men and other ghostly activity on the battlefield. People die in war. A lot of people. Is it possible their spirits remain behind to haunt those who killed them? As we've seen, they do in the hearts and minds of those who killed them. But what about on the immediate battlefield, before the soldiers ship out for home? Soldiers in Vietnam have said they saw shadows on the battlefield. Sometimes soldiers even heard voices where no one was seen. Maybe they were ghosts or spirits of those killed. Were they real or generated in part from PTSD in the soldiers' minds? Even if their minds conjured them up, can you imagine what it must have been like for the soldiers? Their minds and hearts were already messed up. Add to the confusion being haunted by the ghosts of those you killed. Maybe a soldier didn't believe in ghosts, so what then? Were they losing their mind? Dare they tell anyone else? If they shoot at the ghostly figure, others will ask who they were shooting at. What would they say? As an example, I heard about a man who went into the bathroom late at night while on duty. Upon entering the room, a man in uniform rushed toward him. The frightened man emptied his gun in self-defense, but hit nothing. All the rounds entered the wall opposite him. He didn't know what happened. His superiors released him from duty and sent him to a psychiatrist for evaluation. There was no good way out for him. If he told them he saw someone and fired his gun at them, but no one was really there, he's finished. If he said he accidentally emptied his gun while alone in the bathroom, say out of anger or something, he's finished. There was no acceptable excuse for what he did. The report found him unfit for duty. And just like that, his career was over. Word got out about this incident and everyone knew it was the ghost of a World War II POW who continued to haunt the early 1900s building. Other people had seen him too, but you can't exactly say that in the official report, especially when bullets were fired. Being denied the ability to speak truthfully in such a case can cause problems, especially when you know what you saw. Unfortunately, official denial and gaslighting by these people's employer and the media only serves to make things worse. By denying what they had to go through, and sometimes not being given the proper medical treatment, their PTSD worsens. They eventually find it more difficult to talk about what happened because people won't believe them. How can they find healing? How can they accept themselves for who they are, for who they were? Many have become divorced, jobless, homeless, overly medicated, and insane. Friends and family often don't know how to help them either. Not only are these people haunted by what they did, they are haunted by the faces of those they killed while following orders and doing their job. Maybe it was an accident. If you're not sure if ghosts are real, just ask a military combat veteran.